Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're able to see my screen as well as you're able to hear me clearly. Okay, great. So this is what we were basically trying to do in the last class. We were here. So we were basically looking at the fundamentals of operating system. So it is supposed to do couple of main important operations. One is managing the processes, another one is managing memory, and third one is managing the IO devices, right? So we were basically discussing about the memory. There are two types of memories. So this is what we had seen yesterday, the main memory, or you also call it as random access memory, which is volatile in nature. That means as soon as the power is taken out from this, whatever content is there is going to vanish, but they are extremely fast in terms of accessing it over there. And apart from that, you have ROM and EEPROM, wherein typically we try to put the bootstrap loader into burn it into there, which is permanent. And all these computers, handheld devices, laptops, everything are going to come with a EEPROM, wherein it has a bootstrap loader which says what need to be done when somebody switch on this particular device over there. So in case of smartphones, we basically call that as a firmware. So that's basically a fancy name for it. And this was the von Neumann model that we seen, which has 4 steps: fetch the instruction, decode the instructions into machine executable form, execute it, and finally go back and store the content back into the RAM. So this is the 4 step cycle that need to be followed. Further, there is a secondary memory because primary memory is volatile. You cannot store everything over there. So we wanted a non-volatile memory wherein something is written is going to store permanently. That's done with the help of secondary storage. Typically, the popular one is the hard disk over there. And the hard disk is, larger in capacity, something like few terabytes and so on. Gigabytes to terabytes is the typical range now. And in hard disk, everything is divided into smaller units called tracks, and further they are subdivided into what are called as sectors. And there is another popular thing that is coming up and widely used is what are called as solid state disk, which is faster when compared to hard disk, but they are little expensive on the price wise comparison, which is once again basically a non-volatile memory over there. Now, considering the speed and cost, this is how the hierarchy look like. Registers are going to be extremely speed, but extremely expensive. Less expensive one is a cache, which is lower in speed, and further main memory, so solid state disk, hard disk, optical disk, and magnetic tape. So this way the speed is increasing and this way the cost is decreasing. So basically we need to strike a deal over there. You have to compromise on one of these things. So you cannot ask for faster device at a lesser price. So there is a trade-off between the speed and the cost. So you have to balance it at that. So otherwise we would have built the entire thing based on the registers over there. Okay, and there is another type of memory which is available called as a cache memory. I hope you are all aware of these things, which are extremely fast, but it is expensive. Because of that, the size of this cache memory is going to be small. So I cannot place everything in cache. So only the frequently used things are going to be stored in the cache memory. So whenever the OS require it, so it can quickly access that data and process it, and if something need to be changed, it can go back and quickly update this particular cache memory. But since it is small in size, many a times the OS need to manage this particular cache memory. That means to say something is not required anymore, is going to be thrown out of cache, and that particular space is freed up, which can be again filled with something which is frequently used again. So OS need to constantly keep an eye on this particular cache memory and need to handle that particular space over there. Okay, next coming to the IO structures in brief. So there are IO devices connected to your different types of computing things. So OS is primarily responsible to handle this particular IO devices as well. In fact, the bulk of the OS code is dedicated towards handling this particular IO devices. So there are multiple IO devices that we can connect it with the help of what is called as small computer system interface. So, and every IO device comes with a device driver, which basically says what need to be done by that particular device, which is these device drivers are directly reporting to the operating system over there. And every device driver will have a small memory which is called as IO buffer. Suppose I open a huge document which consists of several MBs of data. Then when I say print this particular document, so all that particular memory doesn't fit into that buffer of the IO device. So it's going to be done in pieces. A few pieces of content is going to fit into this IO device buffer and print it out, and next chunk is going to be transferred and so on. So OS is, basically device driver is going to help the OS in order to do this particular job, splitting up that content into smaller chunks and transferring it to buffer, and in turn device driver is going to make sure that that particular document is going to be printed. But one drawback with these IO devices are going to be, they are going to handle only one job at a time. Suppose a large document, if I give print, you can notice that the application is no longer available to you until all this data gets transferred into that particular buffer. Maybe you can try to do it, open up a large document which consists several MBs of data, probably a text, diagram and so on, and try to give it as a print command over there. You can notice that there is a few seconds to few minutes of delay that basically takes you to transfer this particular data. In the meantime, you no longer will be able to use that particular application. So IO devices are basically making sure that one pending job at a time is going to be handled over there. So once this memory data gets transferred into buffer, the application is back to us so that we can continue working with the application over there. So that's how it is going to be handled over there. Okay, nothing much important over there. And the last one is, what is important is to know is direct memory access structure. So what happens is, in case of IO devices, if everything gets routed through the operating system, then your CPU is busy most of the time handling this particular IO operations itself, which is not a good sign. Suppose I give a print and everything goes through CPU, then what will happen is your CPU is completely occupied, pulling that particular data, filling up the buffer, and once the buffer is over, then next chunk you take it and fill it up and so on. So it cannot be doing all the time this, so it will no longer be available to the end user. So in order to resolve or handle it better, so of late this particular technique has come into picture exclusively for IO devices, which is called as direct memory access. So in case of direct memory access, what will happen is there will be a controller called DMA controller, direct memory access controller, which is basically getting an access of this particular memory directly, and it will directly interact with the device. So of course, the things are going to be routed through the OS and through the CPU. That means suppose I give a print command, then the OS will come to know that so and so user is trying to print a document. So it will instruct the CPU to process it, initiate the printing process, and once it initiates, it will hand over the control to DMA controller, that is the direct memory access controller, saying that look, so and so person has given a print command, I have initiated a process, henceforth you complete the process. That means you directly interact with the memory, take out this piece of code that is required to be printed, and load it into the buffer, and the device is going to make sure the device is going to print. And once this buffer is empty, take the next piece of code and load it once again into device buffer and then print it, and keep doing it until the entire document is printed. And once it is done, report back to me and say that I am done with printing job. So this is what will be done by the OS to instruction from the OS to the DMA controller. So OS will initiate the printing process, but further DMA controller is going to handle this particular loading and printing process. Once everything is done, DMA controller reports back to OS saying that I'm done with this particular job. So the advantage of this is the CPU becomes available for the other tasks that need to be done in parallel. So the end user need not wait until the entire document is printed. You can just initiate a printing and go ahead with the next part of the job that need to be completed. So this was not available in the earlier versions of the OSs, but nowadays DMA is one of the popular thing that is widely used in all the OSs over there. So that's one part of the lecture. So any questions so far? If there are none, I will proceed further.
Sir, are device controllers different from device drivers?
Come back again.
So you talked about controllers,
Yeah,
and
device controller, device drivers, everything is going to be the same over there. Device driver is
o-
basically a piece of software which is going to manage that particular space over there.
okay, and device controller it's the same thing, or are they a little
Yeah, it's
different?
the same. It's the same. It's the same.
Okay.
Okay, let's proceed further with the next part of the lecture. Basically, talking about the different responsibilities of the operating systems. So, the first thing is again, we are taking the slides from this textbook itself, the same one. So I'll not go get into the details of computer architecture and computer organization differences. I hope you have already studied these things in a course on digital design and computer organization. So basically the architecture is going to deal at the machine level. It is going to decide how this particular system architecture need to be designed, and it is going to talk about how many registers has to be there, how the instruction sets need to be there, what kind of addressing modes is need to be there, and all these things are going to be looked in from the computer architecture's point of view. Whereas computer organization is going to look at organizing these chips and so on. How can I merge them into a single piece and connect them so that it's going to be a faster accessing and so on. So that's going to be the agenda behind computer organization, but that is not much of interesting for us, but we'll get into the details of computer architectures. So before going to this particular topic, let me tell you why we are looking into this. Because the idea is there are so many varieties are there, multi-processor is there, multiple CPUs are there, multi-core architectures are there. There are what you call parallel computing is there. Then you have this cluster computers and so on. There are so many different varieties of ways in which these systems are going to be used and connected and built. So when you are designing an operating system, you need to consider these things. I cannot have one solution for all these problems. So I need to address them differently. So when you are building an operating system, it is important for you to know how is that particular architecture wherein it is going to sit and to be used. So it's going to your OS is going to do a specific job when it is deployed on that particular computer architecture over there. So that's the reason why we are trying to look into different kinds of architectures over here. The one which is popularly used is what is called as multi-processors architecture, which is also known as parallel programs, and they are tightly coupled with each other. The advantage of this is going to be increased throughput. I have multiple processes doing a particular set of task over there. Since there is more than one processor that is involved in solving a particular problem, the response is going to, or the result is going to come quickly. So it's going to be a faster response over there and more reliable, because if something goes down, the other processor can take up that particular job and make sure that the job is going to be complete. It is not like a 0 and 1 problem, whether the system is up or down. That kind of 0 or 1 or problem doesn't come in case of multiprocessor architecture. There are two types of multiprocessor architecture. One is called as symmetric multiprocessing. The other one is called as asymmetric multiprocessing. You can see in this particular diagram what happens in case of symmetric multiprocessing is I have different process. CPU 1, 2, 3 is what is shown here, but in general I can have any number of CPUs attached to this architecture, and there is a set of tasks that need to be done. Let us call it as processes. Suppose something wants to play a music, something wants to do a complex calculation, something else will run a printing job in the behind, and so on. So all these are examples of the different processes over there. Now, in case of symmetric multiprocessing, what happens is there is no sequence. Any CPU, whenever it is free, can take up any of the processes that is available in this pool of process or pool of job that need to be done. So whenever a user or a set of user wants to do a particular job, they will, type in that particular job, something like I want to play a music. I'm going to open a or double click on that, or open a music player and load this particular song. In the meantime, in the same grid of computing, someone else might want to print a particular job, so he'll issue a command to print it. Someone else might be running a Python, complex Python code over there. So these are all examples of the processes. Everything might, come in random. So there is a pool of job that need to be done. So all these tasks are going to be listed in that particular pool of job. When I have multiple processes over there, what happens is, let us say CPU 1 is free at this point of time, and it sees there is some job that has come into the pool of job. So it's going to, the OS is going to assign this particular task into the CPU which is free over there. In our case, let us say P1 job is going to be assigned to CPU 1. And let us say then by then after some time CPU 3 becomes free, and there is the next job in the pool is going to be P2. So OS is going to pull out P2 from the job of pools, pool of jobs, and it will assign it to CPU 3 and so on. So in case of symmetric multiprocessing, the job of the operating system is to make sure to keep every CPU busy as long as there is unfinished jobs in case of the pool of job over there. But the thing to be noted in case of symmetric multiprocessing, as shown in the next diagram, is basically they are going to share a common memory. Though there are different CPUs available here, all of them are basically sharing a common memory, that is this primary memory over there. But every processor has got its own registers and cache memory for a quicker access of these information and processing over there. So synchronizing between these process CPUs is going to be very challenging when you are designing an OS for this particular kind of system over there. I'll give you an example why synchronization is important in such an environment over there. Let us say this kind of system is deployed in a banking system, say Union Bank of India, which is present in our campus. So there is a branch, there is an ATM. Let us say I have say 10 lakh rupees in my account, which is not a reality, but I'm just telling you an example. So let us assume 10 lakh rupees is present in my account, and let us say I am, depositing, I have given a check for 10,000 more rupees to be added into my account over there. In the meantime, I just step into an ATM and I'll try to withdraw, let us say 25,000 rupees from my account over there. Now, if there is no proper synchronization, remember all these processes are going to access a same common memory. So my account balance is present in this memory, and let us say two different tasks is happening. The clerk has entered this my account details and says credit 10,000 rupees. Let us say that is going to be assigned to this processor CPU 0, whereas my ATM transactions are going to be handled, let us say, by CPU 1. And if there is no proper synchronization, then what will happen, what could happen, I am telling you, is, let us say hypothetically both of them read this particular my account balance at the same time. So my clerk's query will fetch the balance as 10,000, 10 lakh rupees, and it will add a check value of 10,000 and comes back and writes here as 10 lakh 10,000 rupees. Whereas my ATM machine will read my balance as 10 lakh rupee, debit 25,000, and it will come back and once again try to write it something like 9,75,000 and so on. So if the OS doesn't take care to give the right kind of information to these people, then you can understand, right? Ideally, what should have happened? My 10 lakh would have, increased to say 10 lakh 10,000, and from there 25,000 need to be reduced. So it should turn out to be somewhere around 9 lakh 85 rupees, either the clerk's operation first or the ATM or the vice versa. So common sense is the balance should reflect 9 lakh 85,000, but if there is no proper synchronization between these processes, then these kinds of anomaly will happen. So whenever we have a symmetric multiprocessing environment, the OS need to take care of these things over there. In case of asymmetric multiprocessing, what will happen is every processor is assigned a specific task over there. Now you have processor P1, P2, P3. So processor 1 will take care of P1 job, processor 2 will always take care of P2 job, and P3 is going to be handled by CPU 3 and so on. So OS is dedicating them to handle that particular task over there. So this is basically difference between symmetric multiprocessing and asymmetric multiprocessing. How is the reliability going to happen, improve is, in case of asymmetric multiprocessing, generally what we try to do is one of the processor, say this particular processor, is going to be kept as a reserve over there, which will only observe what is this master or the controlling processor is basically doing. Whenever the controlling processor goes down, then the reliability is going to take a hit. So in such cases, the slave, whatever you are seeing here, the topmost, the reserved one, will act as a master over there and take care of the allocation job from that particular point onwards. So that's how in case of asymmetric multiprocessing, reliability is going to be increased over there. In case of symmetric multiprocessing, what will happen is all of these things will start observing about the allocation, and at any point of time anything goes down, so you can have different techniques to choose the next leader. Maybe something like all of them will try to vote it, or someone else will declare that I am the boss henceforth, like an Hitler and so on. So there are different techniques which are available to choose the next leader, but in any case, so this is going to make sure that the reliability is going to be increased in this kinds of architecture over there. So that is one type of thing. The other one you might have popularly seen, what is this dual core and quad core and so on. So what are basically these cores that's going to happen? The core is nothing but one entire CPU along with its registers, cache and so on. But basic difference is all these cores are going to be embedded in a single chip. Here it is all going to be separate chips. So this processor is a separate one, this processor is a separate one, this processor is a separate chips over there that's going to be present over there. And here these cores are basically something similar to a processor with its own set of register and cache, but the thing is they're all embedded in a single chip over there. So this is from the computer organization point of view. So you have two cores, then you call it as dual core. You have four core, it's going to be quad cores and so on. So it is basically we call it as multi-core architecture over there. See, other thing that is going to happen is the cluster systems, wherein a set of systems are going to be, okay, as indicated here, systems are going to be connected with each other through most commonly LAN, the local area networks, and they are going to interact with each other in order to perform the job over there. And once again, there is going to be a concept of storage area network, wherein the memory part of that is going to be kept in place, and all these computers are going to basically access this particular storage area network for the content over there. So these are cluster systems. Now, from the operating systems point of view, so till now whatever we discussed is from the computer architecture system point of view, what are the different variation that we may have to deal with. Now, from the operating systems point of view, so something could be multi-programming, or we call it as batch systems. So what happens in this particular case is, hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. And in the meantime, you had any other questions till this particular point? If there are none, we'll proceed further. If anybody has any questions, you can type in now. Okay, 1 second. All right. So if there are none, okay, Achut, dual core design. I'll go back to dual core design again. Okay, this is what it is, Achut. So there are going to be multiple cores that is going to be present. In case of dual core, I'll have two cores. Let's call it as core 0 and core 1. So these are individual process with a register and cache, but these two processes are embedded in a single chip, right? So this is going to be one chip that is going to be delivered to the end user, that is going to be placed inside this particular system. Let us say it was say Pentium 4 dual core. So you get only one chip which says Pentium 4 dual core. Within that, this organization is going to be placed. So rather than computer architecture which deals about it, this is basically computer organization. So how these two cores are going to be placed, and how are there going to be interaction is going to happen, and so on. So in fact, these dual cores are going to give you better performances, because the communication between them is going to be having minimum latency, because they are part of a single chip over there. So delays are going to be less over there. That's why you get better performances when you have multi-core architecture over there. That's about this dual core design. So OS need to take care whenever it is basically trying to assign a job, it need to take care of this particular design. So it's not going to give the responsibility to different processor, it is going to give the responses to different cores over there. Chassis is nothing but the outline design. You know, you have seen this chassis in case of cars, right? The body of the engine, we call it as chassis. The same thing in case of chips. the outer cover, if you have seen a chip in case of a computer, you'll be able to understand it better. So it is one single piece of this much big processor is going to come. You will not know what is inside it. That's basically chassis within a outer cover wherein it is going to be packed over there. Deepashri, what is the confusion with cluster system? Cluster of systems, they are going to be connected systems and all of them put together interact and get the work done. Rather than you having only one single system that on which you are running the program, it is going to be pool of system. You connect your system, your friends, let us say 10 of your friends are going to work with you, so you connect all of them and form a network of system which are going to access a common area. So this is basically required whenever I want to attain parallelism. Okay, let us say you are doing a project in order to deal with a huge amount of data. I'll go back to my Arogya Setu example. So much of data is there. You want to process it. Running the entire thing, on a single system is going to be very, very expensive. I mean, in the sense of computing power, your CPU may not be capable enough to handle that particular entire set of data points and so on. So rather I can, try to do that particular job using multiple systems. Say 10 of you decide to build a cluster computer and, the entire data set is here. Let us say computer 1 is going to take all the data points with respect to Karnataka, computer 2 is going to say take all the data with respect to Maharashtra, computer 3 is going to take all the data with respect to Kerala, computer 4 will take care of Jammu and Kashmir and so on, right? So now what happens, the data gets divided and so the processing in every system is going to be faster and you can finally merge all these data in order to compute your job. But please note that the operating system is not going to do this parallelism. So it need to be done by the application developer itself. So whatever program you're going to run, need to make sure that if any Karnataka data comes, go to computer 1, push it to computer 1. If a Maharashtra data comes, it should need to be handled by computer 2. So that level of detailing split up need to be done by the application that you are basically running and wrote and running in these computers over there. So parallelism need to be handled only by the application level. The OS is not going to deal with that. So that's about cluster computers. No, we will not be able to cover all of this because distributed and cluster computing itself is basically a subject. There are so many issues that will come up when we try to parallelize things. How do we manage the memory? How do we cluster? How do we balance the load between this process so that make sure that none of them will be overloaded? What will happen if a particular system is down? Who will take up that job? Are there going to be a controlling system wherein it is going to look after all these issues and act like a boss and control these things? All these issues, design issues with respect to cluster and distributed computing will come into picture. So it is all dealt as a separate course itself. It is so vast and different approaches, solutions are there. Yes, yes, Anirudh, you're right. We need to have one such. Okay, so let us continue further. The next operating system structure. So different types of challenges with respect to operating system. So first one is multi-programming, which is a very popular one in the present OSs that we are seeing. So what happens is this single user cannot keep the CPU and IO devices busy at all the time. Suppose I am printing a particular huge document, I cannot occupy this printing job cannot occupy the CPU all throughout. So that need to be CPU cannot be idle all the time. That's the intention of this multi-programming or batch system. So you can see here there is a pool of jobs that are there, job 1, job 2, job 3, job 4, and there is an operating system running. Say it will start executing with job 1, and I know after certain cycles of execution, job 1 requires an IO operation. Maybe it want to get some input from the user, or it want to print something onto an output device, and something like that will happen. So what does this operating system does is it will initiate that IO operation and hand it over to say a DMA controller, and it will not allow the CPU to sit idle. What it will do is it will assign job 2 to the CPU. The operating system will pull out the next job in queue, and that is going to be assigned to this particular CPU, and CPU start executing with the job 2. And in between this job 1 will be completed, their IO operation will complete, and your DMA controller will come back and say my job is done. And let us say after some time this job 2 will also require an IO operation. So then again the OS is going to shift the control back to job 1. Whatever point it has stopped earlier need to be restored back, and from there the execution need to come. So this way all these jobs are going to be jumbled up, and always try to be executed by the operating system. So that is what is called as multi-programming. So every time the OS is going to make sure that the CPU is kept busy unless and until there are pending jobs in the job queue over there. So this will try to do that particular job. So multi-programming environment. There is another variation of it which is called as time sharing or multitasking. So what happens is CPU continuously keeps run through this particular job one at a time, and it will execute it for a very small short duration, so that the end users get a feel that their job is basically getting executed. Okay, I'll come back to the same example here. Now, operating system will make sure that job 1 is running in CPU 1. It will execute it for a second, and then this is halted. Job 2 is picked up. CPU 1 will execute it for a second. Then again this is halted. Job 3 is taken for 1 second execution, halted. Then job 4 is taken for 1 second execution, halted. Once again come back with job 1, 2, 3, 4, and keep doing it until these jobs are completed by the CPU. So this is what happens in case of time sharing. Every processor is going to share this particular small piece of time with the CPU over there. So what will happen is every end user is basically getting a share of the CPU, so that all processors are simultaneously running by a small piece over there, piece of time. This is another approach the operating system basically tries. All the modern operating system believes in this particular multitasking approach, and this is one of the widely used approach you can find in the OSs over there. Some of them are basically interrupt driven. So there are, I think we talked about these interrupts in the last class. So there are two types of interrupt that are popularly available. One is hardware driven and the other one is software driven. So whenever a hardware raises some concerns, they are basically called as hardware interrupt. So let us say there is an IO device, and there is an issue with the IO device. So it will raise an interrupt saying that so and so problem is occurring in this device. So because of that, this job cannot be completed. Or it will raise an interrupt saying that I am done with this particular job, and so on. So these kinds of interrupt which are raised by hardware are called as hardware interrupt. Software interrupts are which we typically commonly we call it as exceptions or traps. For example, you might have seen division by zero. So the computers cannot handle these things. So these are all software errors that need to be caught and handled over there. So whenever a software raises an issue, they are called as software exceptions or interrupts or exceptions or traps over there, right? We also call them as system calls. Sometimes I want to create a new process, so I will raise write a code which will call a software interrupt, and accordingly action will be taken. So we also call them as system calls over there. Now, mode of operation, not most, all of the modern operating system allow a dual mode of operation, which is very much essential. So what is this dual mode is, there are two types of mode that is available to us. One is user mode and the other one is kernel mode. First question, why do we require these kinds of mode? The simple answer is, there is a operating system code is there is user have written some code over there, application program code is there, so they need not collide with each other. Your OS should not go and erase a part of the operating system code, or the application program code, or the vice versa is more important. Your application program should not go and erase a part of the operating system code. Basically, all of them are present in the secondary memory itself, right? So it need to be handled suitably. The OS program codes are going to be separate. The application programs codes need to be separate. They should not collide with each other. So in order to facilitate this, we have this particular two modes. One is called as user mode, other one is called as kernel mode. And these levels of modes are basically handled at the hardware level by having a mode bit. So it's basically a 0 or 1 bit, like your digital design switches over there. So it can toggle between 0 and 1. So such kind of bit is basically present in all the hardwares over there. Whenever that mode bit is 0, it means that it is a kernel mode. So the operating system codes are basically getting executed. Typically this happens at the time of switching on a particular machine, and whenever once the OS is booted and everything is there, this mode bit is turned on into 1, so the user mode gets into activated. So from there onwards, the operating systems will take care of handling the memory, and the application, user application, will start their execution. So these kinds of facilities were dual mode operations are not possible in the older version of the operating system. There's something we had it in 1960s and 70s, like a DOS system and so on. They didn't have this dual mode of execution. So at that time we had a problem of handling this particular memory. So entire responsibility was on the user side to make sure that none of these codes are basically being overwritten over there. But there onwards, all the modern systems are basically having both the modes, and this particular problem is solved with the help of this mode bit over there. Now, transition from kernel mode to user mode is indicated here. So user is executing a particular process which requires a system call. Say I want to create a new child process. So I write a system call to create a child or a thread. So the moment this particular user process calls for this particular system call, then we need to execute the code which belong to an operating system, because operating system is responsible to create a child over there. So this mode bit gets changed to 0 because of this particular exception, and then the operating system gets the control and it basically executes a system call. In short, it basically creates a thread or a child over here, and once this is done, it will reset the mode bit back to 1. That means it is handing over the control back to the user process. So this is exactly how it is used in order to make sure that the two operations are going to be smooth. So whenever there is any kind of interrupt, your mode bit becomes 0 and the OS will take care of this particular execution of the part, and once that interrupt is resolved, once again the mode bit is set it back to 1, so that the control comes back to application program, so it can continue from wherever it has stopped over there. So this is about the interrupt handling using the modes over there. Now the OS also maintains another thing called as timer, which is basically keeping track of the time that is allocated for every process. So you don't want a single process processor to occupy all the time over there. So basically what it will try to do is it will allocate a specific time for every process, and it will keep monitoring that with the help of a timer. So it is nothing but a countdown timer. Basically it will say that 60 second, 59 second, 58 second, and so on. So as and when a clock is hit, it is basically keep reducing that particular time and making sure that once that particular time is done, the control shift to the next process that is in queue, and so on. So in order to know how much time a particular process has been utilizing it, we require a timer, which is once again going to be handled at this level. So these are all the preliminaries in order to, study the design of this operating system. That's why we are focusing on these topics over there. Okay, so let us stop today's class at this particular point of time, and